Good day to you. Today, the word of the Lord came to me from the tent of Rebekah, where she raised up Jacob, the younger of the twins, and the tent of Isaac, where he was more fond of Esau. So two boys were born, and I thought two boys, two worlds. The world that behaves like Esau, trusting on Brawn, and the world that hopefully the church, God's people, who will trust the blessing, the birthright, father's blessing, like Jacob. So, let me put the contrast from Hebrews 12, what kind of world that has grown up now, and the COVID shutdown only brought into focus the dire state, the dire contrast that Brawn overcomes the blessing all the time. We know at the beginning God said, I blessed them, Adam and Eve, to be fruitful, multiply, fill all what I gave you, and to steward what I have given others, and steward my resources in the world, and take dominion over the things that can invade. That's the Edenic mandate. It begins with a blessing. So Jacob, the younger, was conscious of the blessing, and Rebekah raised him up conscious of the blessing. And Esau got reared or raised up conscious of his muscles, brawn, predator, hunter, skilled in hunting, man of the open fields, and he somehow got his father to like the venison, the meat he made, meat he brought, and father didn't hear the voice of the Lord, that God had decided to make Jacob first, but because God had discerned Esau's heart. But mother had discerned that God's heart was about Jacob, because Malachi 1 says, God loved Jacob and hated Esau. So Malachi 1 is the last book of the Old Testament. So the Esau behavior overrunning the world, where fathers are getting greedy for the rapacious nature. The fathers at home, absent, sometimes abdicating, sometimes aggressive. Then education has lost the fathers to profit. Then the work fields, workplaces, it's a real battle, real Pharaoh, and the Esau, the bronze of Esau. Man who looks for the blessing, man who waits for God to bless him, looks a fool. But that's what Jacob was taught to do, wait for the blessing. So this blessing and Brawn conflict, whom do you think will win? We know God is on our side, but so much of Brawn having its way in the world, even in the scientific world. The political Brawn, the political clout, is beclouding, dimming the gold standard of science, as we have seen in the recovery trial run by Oxford. Now we are told they unblinded the trial and removed hydroxychloroquine, saying it is not effective, the cheapest, most effective drug. How much science can, with Bronze, do things? And now it is said yesterday that Dr. Fauci of NIH US has bought 90% of remdesivir stock all over the world. Cost is $2,340 for each person, whereas hydroxychloroquine, the cost would be about $10 max. So here we have the Esau taking over at a critical time of the world's medical history, social history, political history, economic history. We can see how the political Brawn, and has taken over, and it is said in British academia and British peerage, political life, there's so much influence by China, and they are troubled. So I'm not talking political talk this midday. I'm only saying the issue of two boys and two worlds, and we are firmly determined to be the world of blessing, to ourselves, our progeny, our next generation. We want to have something to hand over. And then God said, oh Jacob, on that fateful day when he had to leave his room, leave his tent, and go on hastily because Esau was trying to kill the one who got the blessing. That's how the world goes. Now also, Esau had got so violent and so confident that his arm will win the world for him, his strength, his brawn will win the world for him. And so Jacob had to quit fast. Of course, the father gave the blessing. Unbeknown to the father, Isaac, he was doing what God wanted, but he had to be arm-twisted to it because Isaac did not know what God wanted. Would to God that every father knows how the blessing will go, the legacy will go, how generations will go. So it is a launch for Jacob to be Israel, prince with God. But it was a difficult night, but the night of Bethel. So COVID was like a Bethel night, and meeting the God of Bethel, El Bethel, God of the house of God. May the house of God fully function in the blessing of God, the birthright of God, God's scope. While the house of Esau is roaring. What is it roaring like? Hebrews 12:15. See to it that no one comes short of the grace of God, that no root of bitterness springing up causes trouble, and by it many be defiled. So there's root of bitterness, trouble, and defilement. We can see so many protests all over. The problem with protest is for protest's sake. And there are those who engineer protests to prevent a solution. Many young people are recruited with rage, and their education is disrupted. If you are from a lower income group, if you are from a racial group that is disadvantaged, economically, educationally, the last thing you should do is get on to the road with rage. We have this in our country often when schemers disrupt education by getting students to get on the road. It is politically manipulated, and the organizers are paid by some organization. So we can see in many, especially in UK and US of course, and in many other countries of the world, in the cities, this rage going on, the Esau causing up trouble, using a spirit of bitterness, of course, using a root of bitterness. That's where the problem begins. Now, there is a problem, but the solution is not trouble and getting defiled with it, and then immorality comes in. There be no immoral or godless person like Esau. That's his descent into anarchy. Bitterness, defiled, immoral, godless. He learned to live without God, saying, I can do it my way, and my bronze can get the better over blessing. So it's a real battle, and the church has to fully enter into blessing. Church has to enter into Bethel, where the angels of God begins ascend, descend, the supernatural. Church, we need the supernatural. You in your life need the supernatural to recover from COVID. You absolutely need the supernatural to recover economy, recover health, and give it over to your next generation. Yes, it's a dire battle between the blessing and the brawn. Two worlds. One world, Esau's, all brawn. And it is, when I say brawn, it's fake intellectual brawn, media brawn, and hatred brawn, politics, economics, all going, my strength, my strength. And there is the blessing world, where you wait for God's descent into action, angelic action, supernatural help to come. So Jacob that night, out of his tent, was launched. He had only a stone for a head and a little bit of oil for the lamp. But that night, God descended on him. And he began the journey to become a prince with God, the founder of Israel. And that's how we look at the blessing world. But this is the Esau world, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. So all things that are flesh, physical, exalted, and we know COVID did a shutdown for all this. But now the world is beginning again, and the sense we get is that wickedness will just rapidly multiply. Esau will rapidly multiply. He will want to get back his way in double quick time. He will feel post haste, I had to do this, I lost much time. Then of course the blessing people have to wait with all earnestness for the blessing of God to come to them. God of Bethel with the ladder of God, ladder of heaven interacting on their life, who sold his own birthright for a single meal. For you know that even afterwards, when he desired to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. He found no place for repentance, though he sought it with tears. So we want to see Jacob entering into the blessing, becoming a prince with God, and somehow we will overcome the terrible force, evil force, real physical force, technology, economies going the wrong direction, behaving like Esau. Somehow we know that God with us, Emmanuel, Jehovah Shammah, God with us, God of Bethel, God of the house of God, that your home be a house of God, your workplace be a house of God, meaning where you see the blessing of God and supernatural interaction, bringing new avenues for business, and you are able to hand over to another generation how to do it with God, how to work in the blessing of God. We know when the blessing of God is finished, the mystery of God is finished, the trumpets will say, time up. Before that, we want to be at Bethel, the house of God. Don't miss your Sunday service anywhere in the world. Time to get back to church. Time to get back to the house of God. Increase in the blessing of God. 2 and 3. It was good to be online when it was not possible to gather physically, but it is time now to come together into the yoke of Christ. Yes, and seek the blessing of God to overturn in your nation, in your workplace, in your home front. Blessing of God to overturn this strong arm tactics that's coming on. As I said earlier, they have disqualified hydroxychloroquine and with fake science and made remdesivir $2,340 for one course of treatment. And Dr. Fauci of NIH US, they have bought 90% of the world's stock. So China makes the virus, getting ready with the vaccine. Interim, Gilead makes all that stock of remdesivir in China, and then now it is being purchased. So the whole plan, demic, has worked. We had to only wait for a second wave, and with the second wave, a swine virus, and then the talk will be many vaccines have to be given, and the chip has to be inserted to know every vaccine was received. If not, you can't go to work. I don't know how many countries will succumb to this. You have a battle on your hands for your nation, that the house of blessing at Bethel will win the day over the house of Esau. Brawn and trouble, bitterness, that's the modus operandi. Take bitterness that is there in nations, in races, in groups, especially minority groups, true bitterness. True problems, historic problems. Use bitterness. That's what Esau did. The bitterness sprang up. He used his bitterness to cause trouble, defile, immoral, godless. Will you allow your city to go that way? Or will you say, I'll be a prince with God. I will seek the house of God. I will build the house of God. Psalm 127 will become true for us. And when God builds a house, those who build their own house labor with profit, not in vain. When God keeps our city, it's a real dire battle. Yesterday they just put red ink, red paint on Washington statue, and there's a no-go zone in Washington City. And New York is a mess with violence, and its governor and the mayor of New York City, they don't know what to do now, in that they have given over to violence. There's a problem with violence. There's no measured protest and measured violence. It takes over. But God be with us. We want to be at Bethel. El Bethel, God of the house of God. Show up for your people, that the blessing will overcome in my city, in my nation. The blessing we carry, the house of God carries, every Christian carries, at home, in education, workplace, work field, and in national governance. Oh, Daniel, arise in your seat of authority. Oh, Joseph, arise in your storehouse. Oh, Mordecai, arise at the king's gate. Oh, Nehemiah, the king's cupbearer, may you function for comfort, for good ministry, we say in Jesus' name. Amen.